That's not a real uniform, little lady. It's a costume. And this post is for real soldiers, not for girls playing dress up to get a free drink. The words, slick with cheap beer and cheaper arrogance, echoed through the cavernous hall of VFW Post 78. The crowd snickered, a wave of uncomfortable, complicit laughter that washed over the room. She stood perfectly still, a small woman in jeans and a plain gray t-shirt, her hands resting calmly on the polished oak bar. Her only reaction was a slow, deliberate blink, as if processing a piece of mundane data. Before her, on the bar, lay a neatly folded U.S. Navy service dress white uniform, the fabric crisp, the creases sharp as a razor's edge. She had brought it for the annual Wall of Heroes display, a simple offering to a memory she held sacred. But Frank Miller, the post commander, a man whose belly strained the buttons of his own decorated jacket, saw only an opportunity to assert his dominance. He saw a woman, young and unassuming, and his mind, clouded by prejudice, filled in the rest of the story with ugly, baseless assumptions. He puffed out his chest, the metals clinking like a wind chime in a storm. Where'd you buy it? The internet? A surplus store? Let me guess, you think wearing this makes you special? She said nothing. Her silence was a vacuum, and Frank, ever the bloviator, rushed to fill it. He picked up the uniform with 2 fingers, as if it were a soiled rag. This is a disgrace, he boomed, turning to his audience. It's stolen valor. An insult to every man who ever bled for this country. He marched toward the large stone fireplace at the end of the hall, a ceremonial hearth used for flag retirements. The crowd parted before him, their faces a mixture of shock and nervous anticipation. But when the retired Marine general, visiting from the state command, saw the woman's stance, the way her feet were planted at shoulder width, her spine perfectly straight, her gaze fixed and unwavering even as her offering was carried to its pyre, he felt a cold prickle of recognition. He didn't see a victim, he saw a predator at rest. If you believe that true honor is measured not in the volume of one's voice, but in the weight of one's actions, type competence below. Frank held the uniform over the empty hearth, a grand inquisitor ready to purge a heresy. We burn the symbols of our enemies, he declared, his voice thick with self-importance. And we burn the symbols of those who pretend to be our friends. This is a lie, and we will cleanse this hall of it. He gestured for a lighter, and a sycophant from the bar eagerly provided one. The woman, Anya Sharma, did not move. She did not plead or protest. She simply watched, her dark eyes reflecting the flickering fluorescent lights of the hall. The narrator of this moment was not a voice, but the collective, shallow breathing of the onlookers. They were witnessing an act of profound disrespect, a public humiliation, yet they remained silent, shackled by social inertia and their deference to Frank's blustering authority. The flame touched the corner of the white jumper. The synthetic fibers curled, turned black, and then a small, hungry orange tongue of fire began to lick its way up the sleeve. The smell of burning fabric, acrid and chemical, filled the air, a scent of sacrilege. Anya's face remained a placid mask, but inside, a lifetime of discipline held a tidal wave of memory at bay. She remembered the day she was issued that uniform, the pride swelling in her chest. She remembered the hands that had helped her press it, hands that were now gone. She remembered what it represented, a promise, a commitment, a link in a chain stretching back through generations of service. Frank was not just burning a piece of clothing. He was attempting to burn a piece of her soul, to erase a part of her identity he refused to acknowledge. He dropped the smoldering bundle into the hearth, where it collapsed into a pile of glowing embers and black ash. "Let that be a lesson," he said, dusting his hands with theatrical finality. "This place is for heroes, not fakes." He turned, expecting to see her in tears, or perhaps fleeing in shame. Instead, he met her gaze. It was calm. It was level. It was utterly, terrifyingly empty of the fear or deference he craved. In that moment, the silence that followed the crackle of the fire was more damning than any shout could ever be. It was the silence of a truth waiting patiently for its moment to be known. The next day, the sky turned the color of a fresh bruise. The storm that had been a distant threat on the Weather Channel for days arrived with the fury of a biblical plague. Rain fell not in drops, but in solid, wind-driven sheets. The creeks and rivers that laced the small valley began to swell, their placid currents turning into churning, muddy torrents. By noon, the town's single siren began its mournful, wailing cry. The old bridge on the county road, the main artery connecting the town to the highway, was groaning under the assault of debris-choked floodwaters. A school bus, trying to ferry the last of the children to higher ground, had misjudged the speed of the current. Its front wheels had slipped off the crumbling asphalt, leaving it stranded, tilted at a precarious angle, with the river tearing at its undercarriage. Panic erupted. Frank Miller, in his element, began barking orders at the volunteer fire department, creating more confusion than clarity. He was a man built for parades and ceremonies, not for the grim calculus of a real crisis. Amid the chaos, a small figure in a rain slicker moved with an unnerving calm. It was Anya. She ignored the shouting and the panic, her eyes scanning the scene with the cool, detached appraisal of a master craftsman studying a problem. She saw the stress points on the bridge, the vortexes in the current, the angle of the bus. She saw the terrified faces of the children pressed against the fogged windows. While Frank organized a useless human chain 100 yards from the actual danger, Anya was already acting. She found a coil of heavy-duty rope in the back of a fire truck, its texture and weight familiar in her hands. She moved to the most stable pylon on the near side of the bridge, her feet finding purchase on the slick, muddy ground as if she were born to it. Her hands began to work, a blur of motion that was both complex and economical. She wasn't tying knots. She was weaving a solution. A double-loop butterfly knot for the anchor point, a series of prusik hitches for the safety line. It was a language of physics and tension, spoken fluently by her fingers. The few people who noticed her stopped to watch, mesmerized by the quiet, absolute competence on display. She wasn't asking for permission or waiting for orders. She was simply doing what needed to be done, her every action a silent refutation of the man who, less than 24 hours earlier, had declared her a fake. The silence that had defined her in the VFW hall was now her greatest weapon. It cut through the noise of the storm and the rising panic of the crowd. As she finished securing the complex web of ropes, she turned to the fire chief, a man named Henderson who was being run ragged by Frank's conflicting commands. Anya didn't raise her voice. She simply said, "Chief, I need 2 of your strongest people. One to belay, one to back me up." Now, there was no suggestion in her tone, no room for debate. It was a command, delivered with the quiet authority of someone who had led people into far worse places than this. Henderson, seeing the professional-grade rigging she had constructed in minutes, a system more advanced than anything in their training manuals, simply nodded. "You heard her," he yelled, pointing to 2 of his best men. Frank started to object, to reassert his perceived authority. "Now hold on a minute. Who put her in charge?" he sputtered. Anya didn't even look at him. She was already clipped into the harness she had fashioned from webbing, a carabiner snapping shut with a definitive, metallic click. She handed the main safety line to one of the firefighters. "Keep the tension steady. Watch my signals." She turned to the second. "You're my emergency hall. If I go in, you pull." Both men, seasoned veterans themselves, recognized the voice of a true professional. They nodded, their faces grim with focus. The demonstration had begun. She moved out onto the bridge, not walking, but flowing over the treacherous surface. The roaring water below seemed to part for her, a beast momentarily tamed by her sheer force of will. She reached the bus, its metal frame groaning in protest. Inside, the children were crying, their teacher trying desperately to keep them calm. Anya didn't shout reassurances. She tapped on the emergency exit window and made eye contact with the teacher, giving a short, sharp nod. The message was clear: "I am here. We are getting out." One by one, she began to move the children, securing each one to a harness, sending them across the rope line to the waiting arms of the firefighters. Each movement was precise, efficient, and devoid of wasted energy. It was a masterclass in crisis management, a physical manifestation of years of training in the most demanding environments on Earth. When the last child was safe, and the bridge finally gave way with a sickening crunch of steel and concrete, Anya was already back on solid ground, coiling her ropes with the same methodical calm she had displayed from the start. The entire town, including a drenched and utterly speechless Frank Miller, stood in stunned, reverent silence. The impossible had just been made possible, not by noise and bluster, but by the quiet, undeniable power of competence. Just as the last of the rescued children were being wrapped in emergency blankets, the rhythmic thumping of rotor blades sliced through the storm's fury. A Coast Guard HH-60 Jayhawk helicopter descended from the slate-gray sky, its powerful downdraft flattening the grass in a wide circle. It landed in a nearby field, and from its belly emerged a tall, imposing figure in a flight suit, his shoulders bearing the single star of a rear admiral. He was followed by a team of FEMA officials. This was Admiral Davies, the commander of the Regional Disaster Response Force. He had been monitoring the situation from the air, and he had seen the entire rescue unfold through a pair of gyrostabilized binoculars. He strode toward the scene, his eyes scanning not the crowd, but the intricate rope system still anchored to the bridge pylon. He ran a gloved hand over the butterfly knot, his fingers tracing its perfectly dressed loops. He turned to Fire Chief Henderson. "Who rigged this?" he asked, his voice a low baritone that commanded immediate attention. Henderson pointed a trembling finger toward the quiet woman who was now checking on one of the children. Her, Anya Sharma. She just took over. Admiral Davies walked directly to Anya, his boots squelching in the mud. The crowd watched, holding its collective breath. This was a moment of reckoning. He stopped in front of her. He didn't see a civilian. He saw the posture, the economy of motion, the look in her eyes, the unmistakable calm of someone who had operated for years under pressures that would shatter ordinary people. He saw a fellow professional. "Ma'am," he began, his voice laced with a respect that stunned the onlookers. "That was the cleanest, non-standard highline rescue I've ever witnessed. Where in the United States Navy did you learn to tie a knot like that?" Anya finally looked up, meeting his gaze. Her reply was quiet, technical, and devoid of emotion. "Basic underwater demolition / SEAL training, Admiral. Class 234" Davies froze. The name of the legendary, brutal training program hung in the air like a thunderclap. His eyes widened slightly, the only outward sign of his profound shock. He had expected to hear she was a former search and rescue swimmer, perhaps a bosun's mate. He had not expected this. He unclipped the satellite phone from his belt. "Excuse me for a moment, ma'am," he said, his tone shifting from professional respect to outright reverence. He turned away and made a call, his voice low and urgent. He read her name into the phone, followed by a request for a service record verification through a secure channel. The satellite call was brief. Admiral Davies listened intently, his face unreadable. He ended the call with a curt, "Understood. Thank you." He turned back to face the crowd, which had now gathered in a tight, silent semicircle around him and Anya. He looked at Frank Miller, whose face had gone a pale, sickly white. He looked at the townspeople, their expressions a mixture of confusion and dawning comprehension. Then he looked at Anya, and for the first time, he allowed a small, grim smile to touch his lips. He took a deep breath, and his voice boomed across the muddy field, carrying the full weight of his rank and authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I feel a point of clarification is in order, lest there be any misunderstanding." He paused, letting the words sink in. He held up his satellite phone. "I have just accessed the classified service record of the woman standing before you." He looked directly at Frank Miller, his eyes like chips of ice. "This is Chief Petty Officer Anya Sharma, United States Navy. Her specialty is naval special warfare." He let the term hang in the air. "For the civilians among you, that means she is a Navy SEAL." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Frank Miller staggered back a step, as if he had been physically struck. The Admiral wasn't finished. He began to read from the notes he had jotted down. The words fell like hammer blows, each one shattering the foundation of the town's prejudice. "Recipient of the Silver Star for Gallantry in Action, 3 Bronze Stars with V for Valor. The Purple Heart. Over a decade of service with Naval Special Warfare Development Group." He paused. "That's DevGru. What you people call SEAL Team 6". The silence was now absolute, broken only by the sound of the rain and the idling helicopter. "Her operational history is almost entirely classified, but I can tell you she has served in every major combat zone this nation has been engaged in for the past 15 years. She is not just a veteran. She is a warrior of the highest possible caliber. A quiet professional who has sacrificed more for this country than any of us will ever know. He took a step forward, stood directly in front of Anya, and drew himself up to his full height. In the pouring rain, in a muddy field in the middle of nowhere, a rear admiral of the United States Navy executed the sharpest, most formal salute of his career. "Chief Sharma," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It is an honor. Your uniform may have been burned, but your honor is forged in steel. On behalf of a grateful nation, thank you for your service." The story of what happened at the bridge and the subsequent revelation of Anya Sharma's identity spread through the town like a flash flood of its own. It was the only topic of conversation at the diner, the post office, and the town hall. The tale was told and retold, each telling adding another layer of mythic detail. They talked about the way she moved, the impossible knots she tied, the unwavering calm in her eyes. The name, Anya Sharma, was no longer that of the quiet woman who lived on the edge of town. It was the name of a local legend, a hero who walked silently among them. The shame that fell upon the VFW post, and specifically upon Frank Miller, was a heavy, suffocating blanket. The men who had laughed at his cruel jokes now refused to meet his eyes. The post, once a source of community pride, became a symbol of their collective failure. Frank, to his credit, did not hide. He endured the silent judgment, the weight of his ignorance pressing down on him. His arrogance, once a booming trumpet, had been shattered into 1,000 pieces, leaving only the quiet, hollow echo of his mistake. A week after the flood, he walked to Anya's small house and knocked on her door. When she answered, he didn't make excuses. He simply stood on her porch, his hat in his hands, and offered the most sincere and broken apology of his life. He asked for nothing, expected nothing, but simply bore witness to his own failing. Anya listened, her expression unchanging, and when he was finished, she gave a single, slow nod of acknowledgement. It was not forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. The following Saturday, Frank called an emergency meeting at the VFW. He stood before the members, not as a commander, but as a penitent. He publicly confessed his prejudice, his arrogance, and his profound error. He announced that he was stepping down as commander. His final act was to propose a new initiative. The VFW would raise funds to create a new, expanded wall of heroes, one dedicated to telling the stories of all veterans, especially the quiet professionals, the women, and the minorities whose service had so often been overlooked or questioned. The motion passed unanimously. The story of Anya Sharma became a catalyst for change, a painful but necessary lesson burned into the town's conscience. The site of the rescue was unofficially renamed Sharma's Crossing by the locals, a landmark representing not just a physical place, but a turning point in their understanding of courage and respect. The transformation of the town, and of Frank Miller, became a testament to the quiet power of Anya's example. Frank, no longer post commander, became the most passionate advocate for the new Wall of Heroes project. He spent his days researching, making calls, and collecting stories from veterans whose service had never been publicly honored. He discovered a deep well of history within his own community that his narrow worldview had previously blinded him to. He found women who had served as WASPs in World War II, African-American soldiers who had fought in segregated units in Korea, and Native American code talkers whose contributions were still largely classified. Each story he uncovered was a small act of atonement. Anya, true to her nature, wanted no part in the fanfare. She politely declined requests for interviews from the local paper and turned down the mayor's offer of a public ceremony. Her validation had come from the admiral's salute and the safety of the children, not from plaques or praise. However, she did agree to one thing. At Frank's desperate request, she began volunteering one Saturday a month at the community center, teaching basic first aid, knot tying, and emergency preparedness to local teenagers, including some of the very children she had pulled from that bus. She never spoke of her past. She simply taught. Her lessons were models of efficiency and clarity. She showed them how to tie a tourniquet, how to pack a wound, how to rig a simple pulley. Her instruction was calm, patient, and precise. Her presence was a constant, living reminder of the story's core lesson. That competence is its own credential, and action is the only true measure of a person's worth. The symbolic artifact of the event was not a statue, but the new display at the VFW Hall. It was unveiled 6 months after the flood. In the center, under a soft light, was a new, perfectly crisp Navy service dress white uniform, identical to the one that had been burned. It was mounted next to a simple, elegant plaque. It read, CPO Anya Sharma, U.S. Navy SEALs. Let us never again assume the measure of a hero. Frank Miller had insisted on one final, poignant detail. In a small, separate case beneath the main display lay a single, charred piece of fabric, a fragment recovered from the ashes in the fireplace. The inscription below it was even simpler. Lest we forget. A few years later, the VFW Post 78 was unrecognizable. The air was no longer thick with stale cigar smoke and unchallenged assumptions, but with a vibrant sense of renewed purpose. The new wall of heroes covered 3 entire walls, a rich tapestry of faces and stories from every branch, every era, and every background. It had become a destination, a place where school groups came to learn about the true, diverse history of military service. The story of Anya Sharma and the flood was now institutional folklore, the founding myth of the Post's new identity. It was told to every new member, a cautionary tale about the poison of prejudice and the virtue of humility. Frank Miller, now a quiet and respected elder in the community, was often the one to tell it. He never spared himself in the telling, always casting himself as the fool who had to be humbled by a legend to learn the meaning of respect. His story became a lesson in itself, that redemption is possible, that even the most deeply ingrained biases can be overcome by the undeniable evidence of truth. Anya was still in town. She had finally found the peace that had eluded her for so long. She was no longer just the mysterious woman on the edge of town. She was a revered, if still intensely private, member of the community. Her quiet competence was no longer a mystery to be solved, but a resource to be valued. She had taught them that the most powerful statements are often unspoken, that the greatest strength is the one that doesn't need to announce itself. Her legacy was not in the medals she had earned in secret wars, but in the community she had inadvertently reshaped. It was in the confident hands of a teenage girl who now knew how to tie a bowline knot under pressure. It was in the inclusive atmosphere of the VFW Hall. It was in the name of a simple county bridge that now stood as a permanent monument to her actions. True legacy, the town had learned, isn't a story you tell about yourself. It's the story others tell about you after you've already done the work. The world is full of noise, of people shouting their own praises, demanding respect they have not earned. They build pedestals for themselves out of loud opinions and fragile egos, and they demand that the world admire them. But true strength, the kind that can hold a bridge against a flood and calm a child in a storm, is almost always silent. It is forged in discipline, honed by experience, and demonstrated through action, not assertion. It doesn't need a parade or a proclamation. Its only required audience is the task at hand. Anya Sharma never asked for recognition. She never displayed her medals or recounted her war stories. The uniform she brought to the VFW Hall that day was not for her own glory, but for the memory of the teammates she had lost while wearing it. It was a symbol of their sacrifice, not her own accomplishments. The fire that consumed it could burn the fabric, but it could not touch the truth it represented. That truth was revealed not in a citation, but in the perfect geometry of a rescue knot. It was validated not by a piece of paper, but by the steady, authoritative voice of a leader who recognized a fellow warrior. Respect is not a right to be demanded. It is a debt that is paid to proven worth. It is earned in the quiet moments of preparation, in the crucible of crisis, and in the humble aftermath of a job well done. The quiet professionals of the world do not seek the spotlight. They are the foundation, the unseen framework that holds everything together when the shouting stops and the real work begins. For more stories where demonstrated competence triumphs over ignorant prejudice and where silent discipline defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.